so much for coming out and bearing the storm. I mean, I think most of us got in the building before this, so hopefully it will pass by the time we're finished. My name is Melissa McDonald Luman. I, along with my fellow co-director Ryan and Dennis, we are just so happy to have you at CAM today, welcoming you to join this spectacular and sprawling exhibition by Mary Ellen Carroll. Like many of you in this room today, I am an accomplice of Mary Ellen's. We met in 2007 when I was a graduate student, following an invitation by the Dean of School of Architecture, Lars Lehrer, to teach a studio with architect Charles Renfro, followed by a seminar called No Zone, which precipitated her inclusion in the 2009 group exhibition No Zoning here at CAM, organized by Toby Camps. With her Mary Ellen swagger, she influenced her graduate students to get out of the studio and engage with the city and community. We walked in Sharpstown, adjacent to Prototype 180, canvassing about their needs, and quite literally talked dirty in a cantina following a visit to a landfill. As an artist teaching architects, she made clear that our discipline is all process, and that the process is not a means to an end, but the work itself. The making of her survey exhibition, How to Talk Dirty and Influence People, that opened this week at Contemporary Arts Museum Houston, was a 6-year process. Yes, here, here in this building, we are in it. One that brought practitioners both from within and outside the museum together over many years and across the world. As evidenced by this exhibition and opening events over the past few days, Mary Ellen Carroll is a community builder. She has brought so many of us together over many years and decades in her work. Museums like CAM and artists like Mary Ellen require the sustained engagement and support of individuals and foundations to push the edges of contemporary practice. Thank you, Tiger Foundation, providing major support for this exhibition, along with sustainability efforts guided by Root Collaborative as part of the Tiger Foundation's Climate Action for Curators. Thank you as well to the following generous supporters who played a crucial role in bringing this exhibition to our museum. N2 Stone Foundation, the Stolbun family, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Frank Liu Foundation, Michael and Katie Russell, the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts, and Martha Claire Tompkins. We are also grateful for the in-kind support of Bellows Construction and Lair, who quite literally supported this exhibition through the intricate scaffolding system that we are sitting within. We could not have done it without them. CAM's exhibitions are made possible by our major exhibition fund, and we're honored by the sustaining support of Chinwe June and Eddie Allen, Ruth Driesen and Tom Van Lan, Louise Jamail, Sissy and Denny Kempner, Poppy Massey, Elisa and Chris Pye, and Beverly and Howard Robinson. We are also grateful to the support CAM receives from the City of Houston through the Houston Arts Alliance and from Texas Commission on the Arts. If you had not yet explored the exhibition, please take time. We have many incredible programs in the works, most immediately on Thursday, June 4th at 6:30. Our friends from Nameless Sound Ensemble will be performing a new work in response to this exhibition titled How to Listen and Be Influenced. And on Thursday, June 18th, we are launching a new program series called CAM Cinema Club with a screening of It Was Just an Accident, inspired by the work on view in our lower level gallery, Mario Ayala Seven Vans. Many more programs are happening through the run of the exhibition, including a 24-hour screening of Mary Ellen's film Federal at the River Oaks Theater in August. And we encourage you all to sign up for our newsletter and follow us on social media so you don't miss out on anything that's going on over the next few months. There is also a beautiful exhibition publication that accompanies, Rebecca Madeline's holding it up, the orange book, that accompanies the exhibition and is available for sale today at the front desk. You really want to get your copy so that you can get it signed by Mary Ellen after the talk. And Rebecca, they'll both sign the book. So the work of New York-based conceptual artist Mary Ellen Carroll engages the disciplines of architecture, public policy, film and media, and technology.
Carroll's body of work spans over 4 decades in a range of media that transcend genres. Fundamentally, the work investigates a single fundamental question: what do we consider a work of art? It is dedicated to a social and political critique that explores the intersections of subjectivity, language, power, and knowledge. Carroll is the recipient of numerous awards and honors, including from the Guggenheim Foundation, Pollock Krasner Foundation, American Academy in Berlin, Rockefeller Foundation, Rauschenberg Foundation, Graham Foundation, and most recently, the American Academy in Rome. Carroll received an MFA from the School of Art Institute Chicago in 1989, where they studied time-based arts, filmmaking, architectural history, and earned a Bachelor of Science degree from University of Colorado Boulder. Teaching, lecturing, and public presentations on architecture, art, and public policy are an important part of Carroll's work and have occurred at the Dia Art Foundation, Columbia University, American Academy in Berlin, Rice University, Yale University, among many others. Carroll's work is in numerous public and private collections in the US and abroad and has been exhibited at institutions across the world. This is the first major solo museum exhibition of the artist's work. Mary Ellen, thank you for your warmth, commitment, and advocacy. This exhibition reflects what CAM does best for Houston and beyond: sustained collaboration with an artist to realize ambitious projects and exhibitions. We are deeply honored to continue this more than 20-year engagement with you as an artist. It is within CAM's mission to foster these long-term generative relationships with artists and thinkers, and we are profoundly grateful for your trust in us throughout the process. Please join me in welcoming Mary Ellen Carroll and Rebecca Matalon.
Thank you, Melissa. And I also just want to say thank you to my colleagues, Felice and Yet, in the Learning and Engagement Department for making this afternoon possible. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for braving the weather to be here. As Melissa also said, hopefully we'll time it right and we'll all be cozy here together and then be allowed to leave at some point. It is my absolute honor and pleasure to be here today with Mary Ellen Carroll on occasion of their first solo survey exhibition, Mary Ellen Carroll, How to Talk Dirty and Influence People. So how we'll run it is Mary Ellen and I will talk for about 45 minutes and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So please, I don't have control of the volume, but can a colleague make the, oh, is that better? Let's hope so.
Testing.
Yours is good. All right. Great. Thank you for letting me know. So I thought, as a way of beginning the conversation, before we get into the specifics of this exhibition, and it's making over 6+ years, as Melissa noted, that I'd ask you to share a little bit about the contexts and communities that informed your way of working early on. As Melissa noted, you studied at University of Colorado Boulder. You have a math and science background, and then you went to SAIC for graduate school. And I'm wondering if you could just give us a little bit of insight into the sort of early origins.
Sure, absolutely. Can I just do one thing?
Yes.
My back is killing me, and I need to. Can you help me a second? And
yeah.
That?
Should I undo this?
Yeah. Sorry. Oops. The rain. Oh my God, what a relief. How do women do it? It's amazing.
You can use that as a cushion.
For my back. So if I was able to do a piece in 1986 about women disappearing, I'm able to do a piece in 2026 on women not disappearing and actually being able to give birth at this point. And believe me, the technology is there. So anybody that needs an extra job or some extra money at this point in our lives, if you're approaching Medicare time, talk to me. The other thing, one thing, I never wear hats. This hat is the thank you. It has the QR code. You can take a picture. There's also stickers. Everybody loves stickers that are going to be at the front desk. You might find your name in it. If it's not there, we can add it. That's the beauty of making things digital. So, somebody's going to get this, but let's continue. So, what was the question?
Your formation as an artist, thinking about the specifics of studying, having a math and science background. You take classes with Stan Brakhage and Betty Woodman. You go to SAIC. Like, if you could talk a little bit about the contexts and communities that informed your practice.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, having a background in math and science, I mean, particularly geology. I mean, it was pre-med, and then it switched. But then also meeting those people and making experimental films and understanding at that point what film or material could be from him, right? What an image is, what a documentary is, that it doesn't need to be this straight thing that's about a perfect image. Betty Woodman in terms of production and seriality and knowing that I didn't need to do that, which was a clear understanding of having seen. I mean, there's so much ceramics that is made right now, and believe me, every thrift shop is going to have somebody's pot that they've been throwing at one of those places that do bring community. So, but with that, I also spent time in Southeast Asia doing development work. That was in the Philippines. I lived in Japan. And it was truly at that point that I ended up meeting a group of people in Manila. Martial law was declared, so it was live action history. And there's the people that stay, and then there's the people that leave during political crises. And the people that stayed there were phenomenal. And I was the only puti, the white person, that got included in there. And we made experimental films, we did theater, we did productions. I had a darkroom. There were all kinds of things that started at that point. And a very dear friend of mine, a woman named Amelita Misiano, who unfortunately died from COVID, was really instrumental in understanding what a work of art is. And at that point, looking out at the Reagan era, it was quite a lens to experience and to look through. And so then eventually I came back and went to graduate school, which, I was a total weirdo at that point in art school, but I ended up meeting, we called ourselves the UN because it was every person that was not from the US that we became friends with, and we collaborated and did work. And namely, a very, very close friend of mine who died from AIDS in '99, Robert Blanchon, fellow trickster, and somebody, we started early on doing institutional critique, but we thought it was such an, a circle jerk in terms of needing the historians, right? It's like you had no autonomy that we then said, okay, we don't need to do this anymore. And we started pursuing our own work, both as conceptual artists. And we were both in a show early on at the State of Illinois Art Gallery, that Helmut Jahn building, called Conceptual Installations, which, yeah, here we are.
Thank you. I just to follow up on, we've had numerous conversations about maybe divisiveness of institutional critique as circling around a problem rather than enacting something, or it being relegated specifically or directed towards arts institutions. And obviously in your work, the institutions that you are mobilizing, right, taking their form or function to critique are not just arts institutions. So I think that, is that, I am a student of institutional critique, and so I'm always very interested in the ways that you are both adjacent to that movement, but also outside of it. As you are, there's a way in which you're practice as a whole sort of avoids easy categorization or affiliation with a singular movement or style. I mean, I think, I guess what I'm asking is, like, is that an antagonism, like, between institutional critique and the way you work?
Yeah, I mean, it can be read as that. I mean, it's not my intention to do that, of course, right? I mean, it's, I've been in the art world a long time. You've been in the art world a long time. Many of the people in this room have as well. And if you're not aware of how things work in this arena that we choose to be in, you're naive, willfully. And so I think that in that regard, if you understand that and understand what you can do and what it means to have absolute freedom in your work, you chart a different path. And it's not that something where you don't know what you're doing. I mean, I know very clearly what I'm doing, and I know I've made very clear choices about how things evolve and what gets next to what in terms of the work that I'm going to be doing. In terms of people of a historical legacy, I mean, one of the things in reading through your questions for the past couple of days, I mean, certainly there's people. I mean, Duchamp is an obvious one. And yesterday at Transart, Monique, her paper was delivered by Alicia Harris. And I highly recommend anybody to go by Transart on Alabama to see it. But that historical model, but there's also people like Sturtevant and Marcel Bruters and Polka, but it's also, you know, the poets and the writers and the musicians and the scientists and all the people, and it's what their process was. And I was thinking, there's two great friends of mine who are here today, Dr. Howard Rena and Ann Rena, and the work that they're doing in terms of technology and medicine right now is phenomenal. And that's what I gravitate towards, is the process and what are these material and paradigm shifts, and how can they be incorporated into a work of art?
Yeah. No. I think that's helpful to give a little context. I mean, I think a lot of the people in the audience here are familiar with your work, but I imagine that we also have some viewers and visitors who are coming to it for the first time. I think maybe that would be a nice moment to shift into the specifics of this exhibition and what are the sort of 6 thematic sections that structure it, which you see here mounted on industrial scaffolding. The 6 sections are doubling, climate, policy, media, sovereignty, and being, which all represent fundamental and central concerns for your work. And I'm wondering if you can take a little bit of time to sort of unpack the specifics of why you chose them. I mean, it could have been any number of themes, but I wonder if you could elucidate a little bit more about these 6.
Sure. Well, we chose those themes.
True.
I mean, they began, with your language and framing, and then, it's a little bit like playing chess. You're negotiating and trying to figure out what it needs to be. I'm against metaphor, phenomenology, biography, even though those get used as materials, but there's something, and to go back to Lenny Bruce, of seeing and telling things as they are. And I think in these particular times, where there's so much of that not being done, it's always been the approach to the work. So here we are in this space, 40 years of work. How do you organize it, right? I mean, that's a question that began for you of like, okay, what's the framing? And where you started with the doppelganger works and the doubling. And mind you, in the time of AI, when anything can be doubled, anything can be made, anything can be 3D printed. I mean, we're at the sort of nascency, but we're not. And so then with it, okay, we need to organize it in some way. And so what I said on the opening night was that we made a decision early on that, the experience would be something between like a library stack meets a Costco warehouse meets Ken Isaacs. And to have that, these topics frame it, but it could be framed in a myriad of ways. So when it gets packed up and sent to the Luma Foundation, they can frame it in a totally different way. That's their prerogative, right? I mean, it would be with you and us, but I think that context of how things, and the juxtaposition of things, what gets put next to, right? If you put two things next to one another, somebody's always going to try to figure out what that relationship is, even if it's not there. So, I mean, without going into detail, because we spent considerable time, because language, where everything begins for me, is extremely important, probably to the annoyance of everybody.
Can you unpack that a little bit more? When
Yeah.
I mean, it's something you say a lot, and particularly when you're talking about language, you're also talking about writing. And I wonder if you could go into a little deeper. I think often when you're thinking of a conceptual artist, people talk about the ways that something starts with an idea, but you are very specific about it starting in language and writing.
Well, but the idea comes first. I mean, you can't write from nothing. Well, I could, but I think that you have to have thoughts. Thinking. I mean, and then it gets put down in some way, and people draw. People act, there's a myriad of ways to do that, but what that means is the thoughts are put into language. And that's the first form that it takes for me. And things either stay in language, like indestructible language, or many of the other pieces that are text-based, or they become the instruction for a work like Prototype 180 to use policy as a material, and to have a catalytic moment that would be a 180-degree revolution to make architecture perform as a work of art.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I also want to go back a little bit about the way that we started working on this show. I think that one of the things, particularly as you can see in my interest in doubling, which was really an entrance for me, but I think that for me, one of the incredibly fascinating things is that this idea of doubling or imitation or resemblances actually runs throughout the work, right? Like through camouflage or subterfuge or imitation. It's often, I don't know if it's a masquerade, because it's a mobilizing of an actual material, whether that's radio waves or photography, but there's a way in which I feel like what we're seeing, I'm always doubting what it is that I'm actually seeing, or the whether and how its material form might actually be other, or might be some kind of like tricksterism to it. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, you just passed the course. I mean, that's like anything, is that, what is real? Like, what is reality? And is that the thing that we think it is, or is that the thing that somebody says it is? And I think, a prime example of this is the work that's being shown for the first time that I did at the Rauschenberg Foundation. That's the work that you're surrounded by. It's titled My Struggle, and it's a noun acting like a JPEG. And I showed up at Rauschenberg with 438 nouns in my suitcase, nothing else. And it was after the biennial in New Orleans. Biennials, are the worst because you're overworked and underpaid and huge deadlines, but you end up doing things that you're never able to do anyplace else. And so with that, Rebecca, one of the things is that when you image something, right? I mean, I've repeated Lawrence Weiner, Learn to Read a Work of Art, is that how is there consensus between us that we're looking at the same thing and that we see the same thing? Because we don't. I mean, we can get close to it, but the idea that we are all, that something that we can agree that this is a successful work, or that is what we're seeing. I mean, like this image of like these people in the dog park, which is about the dog park, which is about resemblance and doubling, you might see that it's, Silver Lake in LA. But that's your interpretation, and that's what a work of art needs to do. There's no exacting of that we're all agreement. I mean, we can agree, like the Raphael exhibition now that's at the Met. It's so beautiful. And to look at some of those paintings and what's done, you can articulate, right? You can articulate what's in the image, and then if there's some historical information, but then what's that experience for the viewer and the engager? And then the question always remains, too, of what is the artist's intention? And in that sense, if we're going to get a little philosophical here, between like being like Kantian or Nietzschean, right? If anybody went to a red diaper baby camp and you were either a Trotskyite or a Stalinist, right? Better art at Trotsky. But from Nietzsche's point of view, it's considered from the artist, the maker, right? So we're looking at something, and it's like not necessarily that the viewer has, but it's like, how do we bring it back to what the maker is their intention? And that you have that experience with that work. So I don't know if that answers it or.
It's okay. I think it does. I have to read up on my Nietzsche and Kant, though. I think I'm negligent.
There's a good course that you can take at the New School that I took 1,000,000 years ago when I went down that path, but we'll talk about that later.
As long as the school exists.
Yeah.
I guess I want to talk more about the structure. And again, like I keep going back to these things. Obviously, we worked with Juliana Szabo, incredible exhibition designer. I don't know if she's here today.
She's on a plane back to Sao Paulo.
But we settled on scaffolding pretty early,
Yeah.
and then it became about how we used it as a material.
Yeah.
It's some material you've worked with in the past. We borrowed scaffolding from a local provider here, Layer, though they're a German company. But what was really important in its use for us was the ability to see works through, between, and across one another. And what that also means is what it reveals, right? The way you see backs of works, aspects of, or ways of looking at work that you don't actually or aren't typically faced with when experiencing artwork in a museum, right? You don't usually see the backs of paintings or the backs of framed photographs and all the details. But so there are these kinds of moments in which we can see through, but they're also ruptured by these sort of strange points of bringing us back and reminding us that we are looking at an infrastructure. And I wonder, was that part of like your thinking in using the system? I mean, I know I had specific interest in it, and of course it came from your own work, but you know, these sort of plays with what you reveal and what you disclose and what you don't.
Yeah, I mean, look at the use of the sort of dialectic, right? Of that there's two sides to something. But with this, it was also purely a pragmatic consideration of like, what do we do in this space? And given this space, right? I mean, it's like a convention center. So to be in this with this 22-foot ceiling, talking in dialogue across the street with Mies van der Rohe, of course, as a glass pavilion, which Gunnar Burkhardt, the architect, really did it was a kind of afanculo to Mies when he actually was working on the design of this. And so it's not about, commemorating that in some way, but it's about, okay, what can we do within this space? And how do we make some kind of display system that it doesn't mirror it, but also, I mean, from the get-go, I was like, no drywall. Can you imagine the space filled with drywall right now? It would just kill it. And it's used effectively here. I've seen many exhibitions in this space. But within the context of the work, and reading through and on and having ways in which, as you said, there's both sides, but that you can see through. And you can see through all the way to the back of the space, right? So you also can see the kind of, a lot of what we talked about was sedimentation and strata, right? So in strata, I've had the great fortune to go out to a property with Christina Van Dyke Ford, and when we have gone into that geology and have seen, the layers of sedimentation in history, and maybe in some small way, that's part of what we're doing here. It's not chronological, of course, but either is a lot of that, if you really know your geology and strikes and dips and what can happen in the reordering of things. But the brilliant thing is that Juliana put in her contract that she wanted a prototype on a 1-to-1 scale. So we were able to test out, and to the credit of the team here, Jeff Shore, what they had to figure out to be able to install this work, and mind you, when the tariffs were really kicking in. So the price of metal and screws and all these things that were added on all had an impact. And that's also the way that I work, that all of these things that are going on geopolitically always inform the work in some way. They're there. You may not see it, but you certainly can smell it in some sense.
Going back to this noting that we can really see through the expanse of the museum, I wonder what it's like for this moment, have 4 decades of work right in front of you, as an amassing, as layers, as sediment, as strata, and also what that experience is like, and what, so much of your work sort of like, as you said, it's based on an instruction or an action that sets up a context, but oftentimes the results or whatever happens next are up to chance. And I'm curious if, looking back at this work and thinking about successes and failures and like what this experience of actually seeing all the work together does, because you don't often get the opportunity to experience all your work in one place, or one's work in one place, in a kind of, not a straight shot view, but the ability to see between it all.
The thought of it was frightening.
Is it still frightening?
Having to, I'm terrible at going backwards. I'm not nostalgic at all. And, people are like, oh, it must be so great to relive certain things. And it's like, I lived them. I don't need to relive them. But I'm reliving them, and I'm really appreciating it. And as a dear friend who's here, Lucas Michael, says, you're always and then. And I am always and then. It's always, somebody said, well, what are you going to do when you go back to New York? And I'm like, well, I'm going to try and see if I have any friends left, first of all. Because I've just been, mothballed for almost 7 years working on this. And then, get to work on all the things that have been, waiting.
And then?
What are those?
Yeah, I guess I want to push you a little bit more on, I want to push you a little bit more on this idea of success and failure, particularly when you're working in the way you are, which is the unknowingness of what will happen, right? And in a lot of the work, you're sort of setting up, through talking dirty and influencing people, you're setting up a kind of potential domino effect that happens. And that's through negotiation, conversation, pleading, charming, and I guess, are there any projects that you feel like never fully got to where you had hoped that they'd go, or are there projects that that feel unfinished or unrealized, besides the ones you already consider ongoing, which is how you work? Has this exhibition maybe made you think about returning to things that you thought were otherwise closed?
Oh, absolutely. But my framing isn't, I mean, look, there's things that you do from like 30 years ago, and it's like, oh, does that still, is that only of that moment, or is there still a kind of relevancy of it today, right? And I mean, I haven't done that deep dive in that regard, but I'll give you a concrete example of something. So I've been doing the doppelganger works that really started with the early piece in the 80s in the Philippines. And there's been numerous iterations of that, but recently at the College Art Association, a young art historian named Blake Oting contacted me, and he said, and then this has come full circle. So he said, would you be me? And I was like, well, I've already done that, but yeah, okay, we'll do that. And he was nervous, but I knew exactly how things were going to play out. Like, I knew that, you know, everybody show up, he'd be nervous, there would be the audience, there would be, people would be pissed off, or they would feel like they weren't in on the joke or something, or they would be in awe, as some said. But it ultimately is what it is. And the prediction, right? So the thing is, I mean, similar in science of where, you know, you start an experiment with some idea that you're trying to figure out something. And then you try to gain some information, you want some action to occur, and then you have a result. And I think even like with architecture or any like, I mean, there's so many ways of working, but you begin with a process with an idea of what the end is, and you either come as close to or as far away as possible. And so, you know, are you able, I mean, as the artist, am I able to be like okay with that, or is it then, I mean, is that then considered a failure? And it isn't. I mean, it's just then what the work ends up being. It's not a fixed thing. And I think maintaining a kind of agility and presence at the time that you're working is really, I mean, it's foundational to me, but it's also, you know, that's what makes anything. And what is a successful work of art? I mean, a successful work of art only makes us and you, as the person that's engaging that thing, aware of their existence. And they either decide that it's like garbage and they don't want to spend any time with it, which is successful in some way, or it's something that they have some kind of engagement with. And until you understand, I mean, that's the other thing of like doing science or being in the art, is that the work of art only has to be itself. It doesn't do anything else. Nothing. And there's really, once you understand that literature, music, visual arts, film, that's what it does, you don't want to do anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're actually both much more interested in the failure aspects of things, right? You know, and the mistakes and elisions, and, you know, we talked a lot about failure when there were moments where we couldn't figure out a certain section, and the way that, again, like a domino effect, you'd move one work and then we'd have problems elsewhere. And, you know, I'm interested in failure as like a possibility. And I think that, you know, for you, there are also times where like a work fails to materialize as planned, and it shapes and morphs into something new, which is maybe the productive way of thinking about it, that it's all a kind of transformation.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's a good setup. Thank you. I mean, with Prototype 180, I mean, that's the reason I came to Houston, the lack of zoning, making the trajectory of, you've ever heard this over and over again. It's like being a stand-up comic and you have to tell the same joke over and everybody gets bored, but it's going to be in a book. But eventually when that work came to being and we were doing the revolution of the lot and the structure, we were about a week out from it happening. And I was at the site. A New York Times reporter was doing a puff piece, and she wanted to interview me while I was there. It was a gorgeous day in October, and she said, "Can you detail what's happening right now?" And I said, "Well, the hydraulics, the structure has to go up another inch." And I said, "But it's almost imperceptible." And then suddenly there was this, it was like being like a luau or something. It started doing this dance, and the building started moving, and then there was a crash and a boom. And I was near the World Trade Center when it collapsed, so I immediately ran and screamed, "Oh, fuck." And then thought of also Richard Serra and one of his works collapsing on somebody. And the first thing was to look and see if anybody was under the foundation, because they certainly would have been harmed, if not killed. And I thought, art is not worth it in that sense. But it goes back to then, it became a thicker story because the lore in Sharpstown was when they were plotting out, Frank Sharp, who was a crook, you can read all about him, those, over 3,000 homes post-World War II, they would plot out, right, the lots. And look, we all know Houston's a swamp. It's clay. It's like a slab-on-grade construction is like a surfboard. So we had everything inspected because part of the things, I'm extremely risk adverse. It may not seem like it, but...
You do your paperwork. You have how many lawyers?
Many. I have many. It took me a while to find a criminal lawyer, but I eventually got there. And I don't want to go into this too long, but ultimately what happened is that the foundation cracked because what they were doing when they were plotting out those homes is they would put the form work down on the ground, they'd lay the steel, and the inspectors would come in, they'd say, "Check, there's enough steel." Then, in the middle of the night, they would go and they'd yank out the steel in an area that was not a load-bearing area, which ended up being the back of the house. So literally, the ass of the house fell out. And to your point of failure, that was a big failure. I called 3 people. I called my friend Charles Renfro. I called Greg Feldman. I called my mother, actually, because she was very good at advice. And it's like, what do we consider a house, right? So the Cherry Structural Moving, who are infamous in Houston, they came back and he was swearing and chewing tobacco and spitting and said, "Little lady." And I said, "Don't little lady me." And he's like, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "There's only 2 things we can do. We can raise it or we can cut out the bad and continue." And that's what we did. So it's always then a question of if you were a painter and you got to a certain point and you're making some kind of abstraction and then you're like, "Oh, I'm stuck here." Do you abandon it or do you continue in some other form? What's that process? And everybody has their medium or way of working. Even with, I can continue even with one of the things when we were doing the revolution is that, architecture is the unmovable form. How do you see it? You're either in front of it or you have a photograph of it or you're in it, but it's not like you put it in your pocket or you hang it on your wall necessarily. So when we wanted to disseminate the process of the building and the lot as the protagonist, it's the actor, we see everything from its perspective. We early on were able to develop with a colleague of mine at Rice University wireless technology to do high definition wireless streams. And who cares now? Because we have, these we can do anything. At that point, but then that's when shifting on the policy on the ground went into the airwaves. and all the work related to radio frequency that we were working on something with for transmission that will continue. So,
and just to give everyone context, I'm sure a lot of people know what Mary Ellen's talking about. She's talking about Prototype 180, which is a landmark work based here in Houston, conceived in 1999. Houston, as you often said, chose itself for its lack of zoning ordinances, regulations. The first performance or first phase of Prototype was the revolution of the house, and about 7 years later,
in 2017.
6 years later, the unbuilding of it as a structure. In between those moments, it functioned as a laboratory, as a site of education, experimental growth for native plants, many other things. Can you talk a little bit about what your plans are for it next?
Certainly. Look, talk about the opus. It's the gift that keeps on giving. And I always think, after the unbuilding, so what happened is two hurricanes, as we know. There's probably going to be a few more coming this fall. Harvey, that decimated, right? I mean, it had huge impact on the city. It also on Prototype 180. So the insurance adjuster, there's a great image in that vitrine where he's standing on the roof with his clipboard, making the determination that the building is unsalvageable. So at that point of 20 years of working on something, it's like, okay, basta così, I need to write the book, or there's other things that I can think about. But then, as can happen, a friend who was doing work in material science, and they had been doing buildings of like super skyscrapers in South Asia, wanted to go further up into space. And the space race and all that, I care about in a certain sense, but I don't really care. But the one thing that they did is they developed a prototype for Marcia, which was a house that would be built in Mars. And they had a simulated Mars dust that they used this plant binder, and they 3D printed this structure.
With the idea that you don't take anything, you don't take building equipment up there, you're able to use the material that exists there. Yeah.
And this has been something that I've always been interested in. I mean, from like what we've done in Sharpstown, in places that I've been in, that are impacted by hurricanes and climate, which we're seeing more and more of informal settlements for housing. And so what they came up with was, and there's a material sample though. So after I unbuilt as a choreographed demolition, that I've said I highly recommend everybody getting behind a piece of heavy equipment. It takes about 5 minutes to learn how to do it. You can destroy and build a lot of things, but with that, we saved the construction debris from Prototype 180 off-site, and I thought, okay, I'm done. But then after meeting David and there's a person named David Bauman, who's a friend here in Houston that runs the human factors part of NASA. And they do this symposium that, I don't know if Lee Harris is here, but we've gone to, Serpic's gone, every year. And it's all of this sort of material and medical and research that's done for space, but it's also terrestrial applications, which are much more important. And so what we'll do is we'll rebuild the structure as it is. Like people are, don't you want to design something new? And it's like, no, because it just needs to be itself, from itself.
I wonder if now might be a good moment to open the conversation up to some questions.
Sure.
Questions?
Could you expand on your aversion to metaphor and how it's shown in your work?
I'm so happy someone got to ask that.
Are you a writer? Yeah. All right, this isn't going to go down very well. It's sort of like an untitled artwork. I find it to be really lazy. And I think that the idea of like, why can't you state something as it is, and that the literal is the metaphoric in a sense, because there's a suspension of disbelief of seeing things as they are, and you don't need to translate it into something else. I mean, look, I'm very interested in literature and poetry. I mean, I read a lot, but I think that the form. There's a writer here who made a contribution to the book, Catherine Scanlon, who wrote a book called Kick the Latch, or the writers that I mined the 438 nouns from, that the title is taken from Carlo Knausgaard's My Struggle, but where the subject is the object, right? And how do we make that subject objective in some way? So that's really what I'm talking about.
David?
Yep.
Thanks, Mary Ellen. I'm going to ask two questions. One is, could you explain how you see slapstick versus stand-up in your work? And second, I know that you've mentioned that the installation itself is a work with the title Shall, and is that incorporated in some way in the work, or will it be in the future somehow claimed as a work with that title?
Two good questions. Well, a couple of things. No, I mean, people know this, but nobody did, because I never tell anybody when I do it. But I do stand-up in New York. I may not seem like I'm funny, but I really have a huge following. Stand-up is really hard. It's because it's about reading the room. It's about timing. What's relevant? I mean, look at me. Like, if I show up with a baby bump, are they going to get it, or is that going to be so? But I think, Rebecca and I, the one thing that we really share is an understanding of humor and work, and what that can do as a point of engagement and entry into work. Slapstick is like the gag, right? So there is slapstick. I mean, in whatever it takes of climbing up the smokestack and dumping my father's ashes, which I have no desire to kill my father. He's already dead. But even in My Death is Pending and in the Demolition Derby, there's a sense of slapstick in that as well. I mean, literally, I was being slapped by the other drivers when we were in that, which, scared the shit out of me once, but it was also really an adrenaline rush. But I was gaming their game at the same time, right? So I'm drawing this pattern, and I think that also slapstick stand-up is very determined. Like, it is so scripted, and you can change, but slapstick is much more improvisational. And while you're actually doing it and performing, you're reacting, right? I mean, I would say that Jackson Pollock is doing slapstick, and Sigmar Polke is doing stand-up. I mean, if we want to make it a painting reference, I mean, please, but yeah.
And the second question was about Shall.
Oh, Shall.
Which is, I should note, isn't referenced anywhere in this space of exhibition, though it is in the catalog.
Yeah.
Turn it over to you.
So, I mean, as has been mentioned, you know, I'm very engaged with process, but so that I wouldn't get bored out of my mind of doing this, and it's not being disrespectful to the millions and many hours we've spent in this, but I had to have something about making the exhibition that would keep me engaged along the way while we were making it. And so that being then, how do we make an exhibition together? And how do we think about making an exhibition at this point in time in the world? So in that regard, shall, as you know, is the legal term, shall versus will. We shall do something, we will do something. Shall, it's going to be done, right? And so in that, there were those three parts that were the making of the exhibition, right? The attempt, and I've said that it's not virtue signaling because we can. CAM can do this because CAM is an institution that has not only the ethos within it, but the agility from people like yourself, the directors, the rest of the staff, that understand the capability of making something like this happen. So in that, when we said, okay, well, let's not create any waste or come as close as possible to that. And looking at the structure and everything, pretty much everything can be reused or returned or recycled, if you will. I mean, you can say, okay, who cares? But we cared and we did it. The other part of it was the transport of getting everything here. So in that, you know, I feel that corporations have a responsibility to us all. And so we went down that path with Rivian and Ford, and then that was right at the time that Elon Musk was going into his K-hole in DC. And so,
yeah, which is to say that there were things we wanted to do that when we started making this exhibition, like getting support from a major e-vehicle company, getting support in other kinds of ways that we thought was going to be really easy. But as the world and our country shifted, they became increasingly more challenging and difficult. And our assumptions about the desire of a company to be engaged in the arts were maybe larger than our ambitions for that were larger than the reality based on the changing culture and demands and the ways in which it was no longer an asset to show one's sort of support for.
I mean, we probably could have gone back to Philip Morris and asked them for something, or a vape company. Yeah, anyway, so they were like, no, we don't want to be aligned with anything in the public. But the Tiger Foundation, who was one of the first foundations to support, and they support the Curator and the exhibition, they had been working with an organization called Root Collaborative, and Root basically does sort of sustainability training for institutions. But the one thing that they provided was a connection to a group called Buoy. And Buoy are two guys who I've mentioned, Kai Patricio and Seth Heisiger, who happen to have a Bright Drop electric vehicle. And they did the transport from the first, and we've researched this, and what we know, it's the first long-haul electric vehicle trip for art transport in the world. They made many stops. They charted their charging stations along the way. As I mentioned, they hit Buc-ee's once they got into Texas. And that is incredible. Like, that is incredible because it's not waiting for it to happen. David, to your point, we're doing it, right? And the one thing, you know, when you're installing a show and the people that do all the work, which is amazing, right? you know, there's the front of the house and then there's the back of the house, but the labor and the conversations is that we have had on numerous occasions is about, it's enough of like talking about it and seeing it and framing it. It's the time of doing and making. So the last part of that, a few months ago, I woke up in the middle of the night and I texted Rebecca, to probably her annoyance, but I was like, we've got to put solar panels on the exterior of the building and use renewables to power.
I was like, good luck.
That was basically stay in your lane. So then what did I do? I called my friend Joey Romano the next morning, who's a renewable person who I've done a bunch of stuff with here. I was like, Joey, how do we blanket the building in solar panels or get renewables? Anyway, we, with CAM and some other partners, they're doing renewable offsets. And the one thing, we're going to do a symposium on power that's going to happen in September that I strongly recommend all of you to come to. But the majority of the power in Texas that people don't understand comes from renewables. Like, your power source is renewable. It's wind and solar. So when the wars in the Middle East started happening, and then that was right when like Bowie got on the highway and started EV charging their way to Houston.
So it sounds like Shal is still ongoing. The exhibition is ongoing.
Yes,
So
yes.
as is the project. I think we have time for one more question. Oh, Mary Ellen and I will still be here after for those of you that aren't able to.
Mary Ellen, could you tell us a story about one of your projects? How did you come up with it? Who did you meet and how did it work out?
Wait, which one?
Anyone you want.
Well, because they're, yeah, all right, let's start. I'll talk about indestructible language. So there's a letter A, there's a print, there's a photograph of the skyline in Glasgow, and then there's some other works that are related to that. In 2006, the photographer Joel Sternfeld and his editor, a woman named Donna Wingate, who many of you know both of them, Joel had been photographing some things for General Electric. And he had been working with a group of scientists, and he fully understood what was happening in terms of, at that point, global warming. And so he's like, we got to stop, we've got to do something. And so they started an organization called the Precipice Alliance. And the Precipice Alliance was commissioning large-scale works on pressing issues. I was fortunate to receive the first commission, and it was on global warming. So at that point, it was still about awareness, really, because there wasn't, any question, and there's still what was the visibility, how do we... So for that, I immediately said, it needed to be a piece in language, right? It needed to be, and it wasn't going to be stop global warming. It wasn't going to be an image of like icebergs melting that were dragged into the sea. Because the possibility at that point is that there would be mitigation, and we wouldn't be where we are right now. So then it became, okay, where does it go? How does it go? What does it say? And that's where there's a writing and months of work of like, how do you configure language so that it points to, but it's not didactic, and that it also, if this issue was to disappear, it would just remain as a work of art in and of itself. So we had a site on the Pulaski Skyway, which is the Skyway that's right, as you cross over into New Jersey. Millions of people go by, trains, cars, airplanes, and The language, I knew that it would be titled Indestructible Language. And then what it says is, it is green, thinks nature, even in the dark. With that, I mean, even, at one point, there was an airplane that was circling in Newark, and the pilot went around and he said, everybody look at the right side of the plane if you're next to it, and if you can figure out what that means, let us know. So, and then 2008 happened. So you have this work, you have this organization, right, that's so engaged in these topics, and suddenly they disappear because everybody loses interest. They can't. They have to survive and live, and nobody can afford to support or be a part of. So as failures or things falling apart, they folded. The piece got mothballed, but you don't title a work Indestructible Language for it not to exist. Fast forward to 2019, when the first climate summit, youth summit, was being held at the UN, and then, and all along we're talking to different people in different locations about putting it back into the world. And at that point, if anybody's done anything, I mean, now having the understanding of the UN, I mean, if I'm your person, how anything gets done, but a good friend, Mary Hooverleer, who's here, and Lady Bunny, the drag queen, I highly recommend going to a youth climate march with a drag queen, because you get a lot of attention. And she had a sign that said, "I'm Greta's mom." And you know who that's in reference to. But so that didn't happen, but then the next year was the COP in Glasgow, and Joe Logan and Leslie Logan are here. And it was introduced that we would remake Indestructible Language for Glasgow. And so with all those things, right, it wasn't going to be like made and shipped over, but we had a number of people that were supporting it, that you're here in the room, who made that possible. And now it continues to illuminate the skyline of Glasgow. Still, people are asking questions. Thank you. But then, there's the work on the ground that it points to that is, some of which is visible and not visible. I mean, I do a lot of work with immigration and refugees that I've done my whole life. Most of it nobody knows about because I won't talk about it. But we have done programs. We ended up getting support from the Tisch Foundation for something that we did in New York that was a pilot that's being done other places. But it's about acculturation through the arts. And so, yeah, I don't know if that answers, but you just keep going.
Well, thank you, everyone. If you want your book or Fake Pregnant Belly signed, you can come to Mary Ellen and she'll help you out. Thank you so much for being here. Please come back for the programming. And looks like the rain stopped.